What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolved video. Alright, what's good, soldiers? It is good to be back and talking about Shadowverse Evolve. I'm sorry about that small bit of absence that I was really just being in. I had a whole bunch of stuff going on. Of course, there's a video that I can make that will talk about everything, but if not, that's okay. We can still talk about everything that's going to happen in this video, and nothing's going to change. But I do have important updates and information, excuse me, by the end of the video. So if you're interested in any of the things that I will be saying at the end of the video, stick around and I would really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this Swordcraft breakdown. All right, soldiers, I hope you enjoyed that little presentation here, because we are going to be talking about a Swordcraft class for Inverse Academy, and that class is Royal Paladins. So if you haven't checked out the full card review for all of Swordcraft, which is just Royal Paladins for Vanguard, I highly suggest you figure out what the cards is, card for card. If not, then it's okay, because you're able to watch this video and figure out what this Royal Paladins deck does if you haven't already. Alright, so before we talk about the deck, let's talk about the pros and cons. So these pros and cons might be a little subjective. I'm trying my best to info gather as best as I can with the short amount of time that we do have. I know I wasn't really talking about everything closer to the start of August when everything happened in Vanguard, but I do want to go ahead and get these decks out of the way, so they're just on the list, just in case there are new players that come up. They're like, hey, I'm interested in the Vanguard set. What does these Vanguard decks do? So I don't have to re-explain myself. They can just click on this video. Alright, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the deck, we're going to talk about the pros and the cons for Royal Paladins, which are in the face of, in pros, the good removal, constant boards, and storm, and then buffing as well. While in the cons, we have slow hands and then response small bodies, and then you have to purchase the starter deck and able to get everything that you need. Alright, so starting off with the first pro, we have good removal. So there are a couple of cards that are either going to have Rush Assail, or they're going to be used in effects to do damage to X follower on the field, which is very good because once we're building a board, we can use those followers fanfare effects to remove cards off the field. And with going off in tandem with the good removal here, we have constant boards. So of course, we're going to at least be placing at least maybe one or two or more followers each turn once we get into those later play points. So I think that's very good that our opponent's going to have to figure out how to clear our board every turn. And one thing Sword will always love is playing a card and able to swing at the same time. So there are Storm followers in the deck, and with the Storm follower we are going to be getting a constant board as well. So we get a Storm follower and then we get another body on the field. And then of course we have buffs. So sometimes the buff is put behind a requirement of having X amount of followers in the cemetery, which does kind of suck because when we get into the late game or when we do want to play our big storm bodies, we want to make sure we have as much damage as we can push through as possible. But sometimes there are opportunities where that will not come up, which is very common in this deck. Alright, so getting into the con side, so we have slow hands. So one thing that you're not really going to enjoy, at least throughout all of SVE, or at least in my personal experience with SVE, is that when you have a slow opening hand, yeah, that is the worst thing in the world, because you can't really get your engine going, you can't really interact with your opponent, there's no tempo, and of course on the pro side we have constant boards. So if we have a slow hand, that means we're not able to put bodies on the board. So if we can't put bodies on the board, we're not really doing what our deck does. So if you get those slow hands, then I'm praying that everything is better for you at the end of the game. Alright, so then we have response. So I do believe, of course, in every single clan that's in Vanguard, we do have a quick spell, but if you're playing exclusively for Vanguard, there's not going to be that many quick spells in terms for you, so there's not going to be that many responses. So as long as a follower doesn't have more than 3 defense, which, let's be honest, if we're going to be swinging for some big damage, our big followers are going to have more than 3 damage, then you're going to really miss out on a lot of opportunities to respond to your opponent. Alright, and next up we have the small bodies. So unlike our other starter deck, which of course we will be talking about later on in the week, I won't spoil it, Kagura. These decks, these cards have smaller bodies, so they have like a maximum of 5, and unless you're playing the legendary for the deck, then you can potentially get a 6/6. But at the end of the day, these small bodies are really small, and they can be handled with in terms of maybe a quick spell from Vanguard, and then, you know, swinging in with another body. It's just when we have these bodies that only have like a max of 3 defense, sometimes it's really hard. So you really have to make sure when you're going up and playing maybe a mid-range version, you might have a bigger body that might have like 5 defense, which is a gold mine in this deck. And then lastly, I don't want to consider this to be a con, but it is something if you are a new player to understand that usually if you're looking into getting into a set, then, you know, this usually isn't how it goes. But for the crossover set, you need to make sure you have the starter requirement, because we do have a legendary that was in the starter deck, and that is a must need in the deck if you want to play Royal Paladins at all. All right, so let's talk about the Blaster Crew. So these are all the Blaster cards that are going to be interacting with each other in a way, in shape, or form. Some of them have good cards in terms of like variant cards or being able to evolve and then take care of cards. And then, of course, the late game cards that are going to be using both of these cards to ramp itself up or do different things. All right, so starting off with our big boss monster, we have Majesty Lord Blaster. So it's a 6 cost 4/4. It has Storm and Twin Drive, so it's able to drive check twice. When it comes into play, select up to one enemy, follow them in the field, and for every pair of Blaster Blade and Blaster Blade Dark in your cemetery, you can destroy the selective followers. It also has a strike ability that if there's a Blaster Blade and a Blaster Dark in your cemetery, you give this follower +2/+2. Alright, so I do want to add on that the Majesty Lord Blaster is kind of niche. Now, I will say if you're lacking like a top end and you're running the Blaster Crew, I would say, you know, maybe 1 or 2 of this isn't too bad in your deck. But you're really going to be putting out a lot of cards on the board and, you know, buffing things along with it. So I don't think you really need to go for it. But if you just need to swing in for some 6 storm damage and you already have the Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark in your deck, it's not bad to look into. Alright, so getting next into the card that is the meat and bones of the deck, the literal face of Royal Paladins with other cards, we have Blaster Blade. So he's a 3 cost 3/3. Doesn't have any storm or anything, but he does have single drive, so he's able to drive check once he swings. And then he has a fanfare ability, which is very interesting, that you really want to pay attention to. So when he comes in play, if this card is put onto the field by an ability, you will evolve it. All right, so this fanfare gets past the, you know, you can only evolve once per turn. It's through a fanfare, so you do get a bigger body on the field, and it's going to come with some removal. But of course, we'll talk about that later in the video, of course, so please pay attention. Make sure when Blaster Blade does pop up in the Evo, you can see it. And then moving on, we have Blaster Dark. So he's a 3 cost 3/3 and has single drive, so he also, when he swings, you can drive check once. But when he comes onto the field, you bury the top 2 cards of your deck. Alright, so I do want to give a reminder to all soldiers out there, if you don't already know, that you can mix and match the Vanguard class because it is one universe. It's kind of like Uma Musume. So make sure, an Idolmaster, I can't forget, I'm like a bit of an old head and I think only Uma is just out. But do remind you that this is its own universe, so you can mix and match any of the crafts that you need to if you haven't already understand that. You just do have to remind yourself that the triggers, which we'll be seeing later on in the video, have to match and identify your leader that you are rocking in that combat. Alright, so there's another alternative way to play this deck, and I will say it's the Alfred buff. I don't think this version of the deck is very popular, but I do think that this is another version to rock Royal Paladins, which is another, I guess, pro that I would say is very good for the deck, is the versatility of it. You don't have to build it, the Majesty Lord Blaster into Blaster Blade. You can actually rock it with Alfred early and this Toy Pungle card, which, of course, as we have a Storm card on the field. And then if we have a 2 cost here that's going to buff another follower, then we're going to be swinging for big damage in one turn. So starting off with Alfred early, so this is a 4 cost 3/3. You can evolve him into a King of Knights Alfred, and he has Storm and then Twin Drive, so he drive checks twice, and he's able to swing the same turn he's played. And then we have this card, Toy Pungle, which is a 2 cost 3/2, which is a nice body as well. But you can select a Vanguard follower that costs 4 or more on your field, and you give a +2/+2, rush, and a sail. Now, this isn't going to be, of course, the entire deck, let's be serious, but this is going to be a very good way. So if we have a 4/4 body that turns into a 6/6 body with Storm, and someone who is swinging for 6 damage in one turn is definitely going to be affecting your opponent's life points by a lot. So if you're really looking forward to the Alfred buff side of things, then I'd say it's a pretty good way. But I think these are like really the only 2 ways to play the deck. Of course, if there's one more, let me know in the comments below. I will be incited on everything that's Royal Paladins, but I want everybody to know I am still learning about Vanguard as well. So I will say that this card is still played in decks, and if you want to run this card, I don't discourage it, but I will say it is an honorable mention because in most lists, I don't see it all too often. And that card is Star called Trumpeter. So this is a 4-cost 3/3. Of course, this is one of the cards that if you are running the buff version of Royal Paladins, then this isn't a bad card to be rocking. Since you're going to be playing this card and looking for 2 blaster cards, it does kind of hurt when you only get the +1 and you get to put another card into the cemetery. So this is kind of more of a key card for the Majesty Lord Blaster on your top end. But you do have to realize when you're playing Shadowverse Evolve, if you're not either interacting with your opponent in terms of removing the cards or you're building a board, you know, just adding one card to your hand and then burying it is kind of lackluster on turn 4, which granted, adding a card is also like very nice. I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, but you know, when we're on turn 4 and then we need to ride this follower for 1 to give a drive to the single check and everything, it just seems kind of lackluster than what other followers are going to be doing on turn 4 in other decks. Alright, so let's figure out how in the world we are going to play this Blaster Blade through abilities to get this fanfare off. And of course, we have these 2 wonderful cards that do said things. Alright, so looking at King of Knights Alfred, so the 4-cost we looked at earlier that had Storm and Twin Drive evolves into this. So he still has Storm and Twin Drive, so when he swings, you do the drive check twice. But on evolve, you search your deck for a Royal Paladin follower that costs 3 or less, summon it, and then shuffle, and if there are at least 15 Royal Paladin cards in your cemetery, you give a +1/+1. Alright, so I will say that this Evo is another part of the meat and bones of the deck. I will say that King of Knights Alfred is just a goat. So when you're able to go ahead and get a card from your deck and then put it onto the field, no matter what it is, as long as it's a 3 or less Royal Paladin, then you can start doing a whole bunch of things in one turn. And guess what follower is a 3 or less? We have Blaster Blade, and then we have Toy Pungle. So Toy Pungle is going to come into play. It's going to fanfare is going to go off. Look at that. We have a Storm Body that can turn into a 6/6. So yeah, that's a lot of big damage. And then also you can get your Blaster Blade, which can be played and that can be evolved for free if you need to in turn, you know, respond to somebody's body or something like that. So I think that's pretty good. All right, and then next up we have Wingle. So it's a 1-cost 2/2, but you can spend 3 play points to engage this card, and you can select a Blaster Blade in your cemetery and then summon it. Of course, you obviously want to go for the Knights of Knights Alfred so you can build a body, but having a 2/2 body on the field engage while also having a Blaster Blade, which will evolve at the same time, is very good, but I would treat this as a secondary engine if you're going to be playing Blaster Blade. Alright, so one thing that we are going to be rocking with the Vanguard class is these starter amulets, and these starter amulets really do help out because they give us some extra value in terms of just having a deck that we really enjoy playing. So, of course, we have starting amulets. Starting amulets start on the field face down, and you make sure you can only have one of them in your deck. So we have 2 to choose from when playing Royal Paladins or Swordcraft, whichever you want to identify it as. So Starter's Trumpeter and Wingle Brave are 2 good amulets that you can rock in the class. Some people run to Starter's Trumpeter because you can put any Vanguard to make it a +1/+1. But of course, if you're rocking the Royal Paladins, it isn't a bad choice to go Wingle Brave so you can draw a card and then discard a card so you can start that filtering for the Royal Paladins. Alright, so moving on, we have the triggers. So these are all the triggers that you're able to use in Royal Paladins, and of course you're rocking the Aichi Sendo leader or Swordcraft leader, each whatever you want to, you know, phrase it as, you know, welcome Vanguard players. But these are all the triggers you're able to use in the Royal Paladins deck. Do not look at any triggers because the triggers will only activate in your Vanguard deck if they match your leader's identity. So these are all of them, so, you know, look at them. These are the ones you will be getting in the starter deck, which are the requirement that you need and able to play the Vanguard class with the Blaster Blade and the Alfred. So, you know, don't think about running any other triggers and having a confusion like that. So here are all of them. Alright, so honestly, I think if I had $1 for every time I said trigger in the last section there, I think I'd be pretty rich. But another cool thing about Royal Paladins is that it has good removal, and of course there is multiple signs of removal with different evolves. So let's go ahead and figure out what the removal cards are. Alright, so looking at our first card, we have Blaster Dark. So this is going to be one of the evolved targets that you're going to be using for Blaster Dark for the Majesty Lord Blaster top end if you're going to be using them. So on evolve, of course, you're going to be selecting enemy follower and then dealing it 3 damage, and then 1 more for every 5 Shadow Paladin cards in your cemetery. So if you're running this for Royal Paladins, you're not obviously going to have a whole bunch of Shadow Paladin cards in your cemetery. So you're not going to be doing more than the 3 damage. But I think this is very good tempo whenever your opponent's building a board and you don't want to go for 1 in terms of followers. You can rock Blaster Dark, which is a very good card that you can go ahead and just ping a follower for 3 and then take care of it. And also a single drive, so you have a chance to hit those drive triggers. Alright, and next up we have Knights of Friendship K. So this isn't a bad 3-cost body just because it can be free as long as you flip a blaster card face down that is face up in your evolved deck. So this inherently isn't going to be one of those followers that comes in with a fanfare and says, hey, you know, deal X to a follower or remove X follower. This is going to be the rush follower that's going to swing into another follower. So as long as it has 4 defense, then Knight of Friendship K is going to be a good go card, along on top of the engine that you can flip those Blaster Blade Evolves face down so you can keep reusing them. All right, so this next card, well, one, the text is so small, I'm not going to even force myself to read that. But I know this is another card that isn't played in too many of the Royal Paladin cards, or excuse me, decks. So I think this is still a nice card just because it has 5 attack. And it can also potentially turn into Storm as long as you're doing your engine, but let's be serious. Getting 15 Royal Paladins in the cemetery is really a big ask. So if you're going to be rocking the engine, make sure you're on Turbo Filter. Because if you're on Turbo Filter, getting the the 15 Royal Paladins isn't too crazy, but it isn't something that's going to occur every game. But in terms of the card itself, it is nice to just deal 5 damage to an enemy follower just because there are pesky followers that are over 4, and it's very hard to remove some things, so having a 5 defense removal is very good. And then on top of that, if you have the Royal Paladins, this follower becomes a 6 attack with Storm, which is very helpful. And of course, last but not least, we have Blaster Blade. So the Meat and Bones Evolve card that you're going to need from the deck. But don't mind you, if you don't already have the stuff, the starter deck has your back. So you're going to get 3 of these in the starter deck if you haven't already picked them up. So Blaster Blade, this is the card that you're going to evolve into for free off of the fanfare Blaster Blade, as long as the card came in from an ability. So he still has single drive, but on evolve, select the enemy follower on the field and then deal it damage equal to 2 times the number of Royal Paladin followers on your field. So this can come up with multiple situations. So you can deal 4 automatically as long as you do this Blaster Blade play with the Alfred early evolve. So you get 2 Royal Paladins on the field, so you're going to be doing 4. And mind you, that doesn't count for if you're going to be doing it later on in the game, where you're going to be playing multiple cards onto the field. So you can technically do a total of 10 damage to something if you're able to have a full board of Royal Paladins, but in my playing, or the times I have played Royal Paladins, I haven't had a full board of followers like that because, let's be honest, when we're playing Shadowverse Evolve, most of the time, most of our stuff is going to get removed. So, you know, an automatic 4 damage to something is very helpful, especially when you're going to be using a evolve target as a rush. Alright, so let's talk about one of my personal favorite things about playing card games is drawing. So our 1-cost Mirror Biru is a card that we want to optimally have in our hand so we can reveal the Royal Paladin follower so we can get that extra card into our hand. And then we have a 1/1 body on the field. So if we're running either the Star Trumpeter, the Amulet at least, we can turn this into a 2/2 Goblin, which is helpful. Or we can just leave this on the field and then we can use the Wingo Brave so we can get some extra filter out, which can help with the next card we will be talking about, Barkall. So Barkall is another one good card that is going to have ward, and as long as it isn't banished, you're going to be drawing a card. And as long as this card is discarded by a Royal Paladin card, you can just slam this card into your EX area, and then at any point in the time in the game when it's your turn, you can spend 1 to play 1 for the Barkall and then have a 0/1 ward. So it kind of feels like a bell ringer for the deck. And then lastly, this card isn't played too often, but, you know, I wouldn't shy away from it if you really want to experiment with Royal Paladins. It's the Solidarity Knight Gancelot. So, of course, we're going to be rocking Blaster Blade into our deck, so this fanfare is going to be very apparent. But it has Rush and Assail and Twin Drive, so it's able to drive check twice. When it comes into play, if there's a Blaster Blade in your cemetery, you draw 2 cards and then you discard a card. For the rest of this turn, this follower doesn't take damage. So, of course, I could have counted this follower in terms of removal, but I think it's going to be very helpful to dig through your deck, and then, you know, also filtering so you can get those 15 Royal Paladins into your cemetery for Alfred. Just being able to +1 there in terms of drawing cards is just very helpful. Alright, so of course I wanted to include some tech, so mind you, we are stuck in our universe. So there aren't too many things to really look at in terms of tech, but these are the things that I really wanted you to focus on if you ever had any problems. So we have the Knight of Truth Gordon, 2-cost quick spell, so you can choose one of the following. You can select any following field and deal 3 damage, or the next time your leader would take damage this turn, it takes that much -5 instead. So I think that's very helpful in terms of if someone's going to swing with a big body, you're not prepared. This is just a good one-off card to just sit on and be like, hey, you know, I have 2 play points up. There might be a situation where my enemy might swing at me for 7, and that can turn into 2 very quickly. And then next up, we have the 1-cost quick spell, which is in form the 1-cost quick spell that's going to be coming for every class. It's kind of like a snipe, but then it does something else in the other set of abilities. So by Flash Shield Isolet, so it's a 1-cost quick, you can choose one of the following on the field. You can deal either 2 damage, or you can discard a Royal Paladin card and then select enemy fall on the field and then deal it 3 damage and give your leader +2 defense. So like I said, it's very helpful. You can heal and also deal 3 damage to something, which can be helpful in terms of removal. But outside of that, if you don't have the Royal Paladin to discard to get all those other effects, you're just going to be dealing 2 damage to something at quick timing. I also wanted to include the Powers Converged, the neutral card. Of course, there's another one, I can't remember the name of it, but all these neutral cards in this universe kind of do the same thing. So you can choose one. If there are at least 3 face-up cards named Drive Point in your Evolve deck, you can choose up to 3 instead, which will be very helpful for this deck, because you can either 1, select enemy fall on the field and then deal 4 damage, or 2, select the follower in your cemetery and add it to your hand, or 3, give your leader +4 defense. And if you have those 3 face-up drive points, you can do all 3 of these. Alright soldiers, so I wanted to stop for a second, and we'll decompress here from all the information we just gathered. Of course, we're going to be going over things in the grade, but I did want to sit down and talk with you all. That I really appreciate all of you watching. It means a lot to me. So if you could drop a huge subscribe, it would help the channel a whole bunch. I really want to see Shadowverse evolve, grow, but you know, it's kind of hard when life kind of hits you and you know, they're not really giving you resources to really help you out in terms of like growing their game. And you know, they're kind of like pinching themselves in terms of like all the stuff that's coming out. I really don't know what the grand plan and scheme of things is. I wish I was kind of in the know so I know, you know, this is what the plan is, but I'm just a consumer like all of you. I enjoy the game and I just want to make sure everybody's on the same term of like information, because I did kind of scroll on, you know, like social media a little bit, and the one thing I kept seeing was how do triggers work. You know, I'm new to the game, I'm really interested in Vanguard, and I'm like, man, it really does hurt to be the person that people look up to for the information gathering at times. And then like you can't put out content because stuff is just going on and you do not have the time to sit down and make videos. So I'm glad that I'm able to make videos. So if I haven't already said it, I appreciate all of you. I love you. And you know, by the end of the video, you're probably going to hear that again. But drop a subscribe if you enjoy any of the information. And if you want any of the information to be different, drop a comment below. I will take, you know, the hard criticisms and stuff like that. But you know, we're getting back into the swing of things. So do be a little easy on me. It's my first day back. So I'm glad that you all are doing well in watching this video, and I am appreciative that you all rock with me. But of course, getting to the grade of the deck. So Royal Paladins has a lot of things going for it. So it does kind of hurt that you do need the starter requirements to kind of just like rock the deck. It kind of feels weird that a box is going to be coming out and it's like, oh yeah, you got to pick up the starter so you can have the legendaries for it. But it is very convenient that, you know, the starters have most of the legendaries that you need. And then the legendaries that come in the actual booster box of the set, you sometimes don't even need. But of course, we're going to need all of the other cards. So make sure you pick those up if you need to. So that was like the only big like thing in terms of like money. But in terms of like mechanics and engine, I would say that it has a pretty like decent way of removing things. It kind of focuses on the blaster blade, so it does kind of feel weird. And there's multiple ways to build it. So if you can find a very concurrent build that like is very consistent for you, then you know, like don't mind this grade at all. I think I graded it fairly like fair, but I will say there are times when this deck feels like it's like a C tier deck, and then there's times when the deck just high rolls and, you know, turns into an S deck. But you know, there's a different deck that we will talk about and stuff like that. But getting into the grade, but before we get into the grade, let's look at a couple of deck lists. All right, so if you follow along on the Shadowverse Evolve website, they have a little section that is for the recommended decks. So if you want to actually build the Lord Blaster, or excuse me, the Majesty Lord Blaster build, this is the build that they do have as a pretty good example build. I will say there are a couple problems with it just because they're rocking all this legendaries that you need. And there are some legendaries that you probably want to include into your deck that they don't have, which is okay. But you know, this is a good starting off point if you really want to build Royal Paladins and like see how it rocks. If you enjoy it, then you know, you can keep onto it, keep building onto it. And if you don't, then you can put it down and play something else. But however, I did, and I'm not going to claim this as mine, this is one of the lists that did top in JP. So if you really want to play something that's really like comp heavy, or you want to see the full power of Royal Paladins, so this is the other version, not the Majesty Lord Blaster, but this is the buff version of Royal Paladins. I want to call it Sword Paladin, but it's kind of like the same thing. So it should have all the triggers in it that you need. If I missed any of them, I'm sorry. But this is the buff version of the deck where you're going to be building boards, and then when you do go for storm damage, you're going to be playing a body that's going to be plussing up the bigger storm damage. So you have more storm damage to swing in with, because come on, who hates big storm damage? So this is probably more of a comp build for Royal Paladins. So I'd say look into it if you are very interested in Royal Paladins. I have 2 deck lists versus the Lord Majesty Blaster and then the Royal buff ones. So these are the 2 that you can really look into in terms of building the deck. So I hope you have some good success with it if you end up rocking this. Alright, so getting back into the grade of the deck. So one thing I will say about Royal Paladins is that it's pretty cool. It has some pretty good removal, you can build a board pretty quickly, and then you can also have some pretty good storm damage. And through different starting amulets, you can either progressively do your engine, or you can make a body bigger, which is also helpful in certain instances. Like, hey, you know, I have a goblin, and then that goblin can turn into a 1-cost 3/3, which can really sneak up in terms of damage. And, you know, on the early terms, doing 3 damage to something is a little hard. So I think having like just the multi terms of abilities and using things can make this deck very good. Now it does have its downsides of, you know, shelling out on like the starters, which, you know, I think the starters might actually make it a little bit better, so it might not be a con. But it does have like a weaker top end. So of course, if you've built your bodies like multiple times and you haven't like finished your opponent off, then you're kind of scraping by on what is the end game. So I would say, you know, if you can't really do everything that you need to do in the mid-range, you are now hitting DEFCON 5, because one thing that Sword doesn't really like to do very well in the late game is like play the game. So once you get into the late game, you're not going to be doing very well, but you're building bodies, and if your opponent can't really answer your bodies that you're putting multiple out of, and then also putting storm followers on the field, if they can't really answer all of that, you're doing very well. But getting into the grade, so I want to give this deck an A-. I think it's pretty solid. So if you want to get into the Vanguard, I would say this is a very good universe to start. And if you want to figure out how Shadowverse Evolve is played, this is a pretty good way to start. Now, I will say that as this is a very good way to start, this is not how typical decks are built. So, you know, do take that in with a grain of salt when making this deck, or when playing this deck, because not a lot of the other decks are going to really play like this. But if you're experiencing and you like, oh, you know, I'm playing a body, this body plays another body, and then, you know, sometimes that body might do something else, or you can get those fanfare effects off, then you're really enjoying Shadowverse Evolve, because there are cards that do a lot of that in Swordcraft. Because trust and believe, as a Swordcraft player myself, and as Leonidas as our face card, there is a lot of stuff going on for Swordcraft. So if you like storm damage and you like building boards and then making your opponent answer them, then I think Swordcraft is something to look forward to into playing future Shadowverse Evolve. But if you're only here for the Vanguard stay, you know, I hope you stay for longer in terms of Shadowverse Evolve. But I think this is a pretty good deck to be playing, so I'd give it a solid A-. And alright, Shadowverse soldiers and scholars, whatever you want to be called for the Inverse Academy series. So that is it for Royal Paladins. Thank you so much for watching. Now, in terms of announcements, I do want to say that I am now going to be more active in the Discord. I'm looking for active mods so we can have people like talking in our Discord. Every time I stream, I'm going to be in the Discord, in the general chat, in the Spartan Hangout section that I now have in there. So if you catch me streaming and you actually want to hang out and play video games, I'm going to be free to be doing that, because I have a new little time restraint schedule. I won't be on the game all day, but of course I want to get up and catch up on Shadowverse Evolve. So if you guys want to have a Shadowverse Evolve talk, or if you want to have like a little interview, because I'm asking players now how they feel about Shadowverse Evolve, because I personally, as this little break that it did take, due to, you know, other things, it was like pretty weird. So like I said, I don't know if I've said it already before, because I have so many things running in my head versus Shadowverse Evolve, my life, and the things that I may have said or haven't said. But I do want to say that if you are very interested in what happened, I can drop a video, like a little update on what's been going on. I really do want to make Shadowverse Evolve content that you all enjoy. I want to make sure I'm on top of things. So come set 11, we'll probably be more on top of things. And then we're going to talk about all the decks under the sun in one tier list, because it's been a hot minute since we talked on a tier list and talked about all these decks and stuff, but I haven't been playing too often, so I don't want to give any of you any wrong information that I don't already know, or, you know, just not super concrete on. So, and if I don't know any information, I am free to let you all know that I don't know, because I'm not going to sit here and misread misinformation and be incorrect all the time. But, you know, I'm not an ambassador, so I can't be 100% on the, you know, Shadowverse Evolve. So if I say I don't know and I have my hands up, please don't point like the gun at me. I'm human just like all of you. So, you know, just bear with me. So yeah, just a review of the announcements. Like I said, I'm going to be more active on Discord. If you're in the Discord, you're going to get a notification every time I do post a video. So if you're already in there, I really appreciate it. And if the Discord link isn't working, because I just removed community mode because we were getting spam pinged for stuff that was 18 plus, which I'm not going to be supporting, even though, you know, we kind of are pushing like a little etchy agenda when it comes to this game. So, you know, people aren't going to be looking forward to that in the future sets where we're going to have the bikinis and everything and, you know, butts and stuff out. But, you know, I'm not against that. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Like, we know what we like. Like, come on, like, we know what we like. So, you know, in terms of announcements, I will say, you know, I'm going to be in the Discord more. I will be streaming a lot more. And when I do stream, I will sit in the Discord. So, you know, if you want to have a personal talk, please keep it PG for when I am streaming. And if you have any insights on either wanting to either be a mod or be like helping the Discord community grow, please let me know. I'm in the Discord and I'm mostly active in the Discord. I'm probably going to be reaching out with other people in terms of like collabs, because I have definitely personally been like, I wouldn't say like needed, but I've just wanted to grow my channel a little bit more. So like if I shout somebody out, it'll actually mean something, because I didn't really want to shout out and only had like 300 subscribers. It's like, hey, you know, you want to collab? And they're like, you know, what am I gonna benefit off of you besides a good time? And I kind of want to keep that high energy for Shadowverse Evolved, because in playing Worlds Beyond, which I have been playing during the break, I am having the same luck that I was when playing the CCG. And I personally do enjoy Shadowverse Evolved a lot better than Worlds Beyond, in my opinion. So, you know, we're still going to be in love with Shadowverse Evolved. We're still going to intake the content, and we're still going to keep a consumer view, because let's be honest, like when I sat down and I tried to buy Hero Sword and I needed Silene or Celia Sky Commander, I couldn't justify the shell out for how much Celia Sky Commander is. And, you know, if you haven't seen what Celia Sky Commander is, I'd say go check it out. And that is like one of the big reasons why I took a break. So if you don't want to, feel free not to. But hey, I just want to give everybody the update on the announcements that's all going on. I am officially done with the Yap session. I will say I'll probably talk about it a little bit more if you guys have any questions. But, you know, until next time, I hope everyone is safe in whatever they do tonight and safe whatever they do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. It would really help out the channel and really help me out. And if you want to check out my other socials, I said have them under the YouTube video or somewhere on my YouTube. If not, then, you know, I will try my best to update it in the future. But until next time, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye. Alright, so these are the Evolve cards that I probably have not already talked about, or the legendary cards that you may have already seen, but there is some decent removal in this deck. So starting off with Blaster Dark, this is going to be the Blaster Dark if you're running the Majesty Lord Blaster, which with the top end, you need at least one Blaster Dark to really get the full effects of the fanfare. But when he comes into play, or on Evolve, excuse me, select enemy following field and then deal it 3 damage, and then deal it 1 more damage for every 5 Shadow Paladin cards. Alright, so starting off with the first card, so we have Blaster Dark. So mind you, you're only going to be rocking Blaster Dark if you really want the Majesty Lord Blaster in as your top end. But if you want to run Raster, Alright, so starting off with the first card, we have Blaster Dark. So this is going to be the Evolve card for the Blaster Dark if you're going to be rocking the Master Jesus. Alright, and then next up we have Knight of Friendship K, which is a very essential card that you're going to need in terms of removal. Like, yes, this card doesn't just remove when it's played, but it is a rush follower, so whenever we use rush followers, we want to make sure that we just go 1 for 1. And if a follower has 4 defense, then, you know, K is a very good card to be rocking. But on top of that, when playing this card, you can turn a face-up Evolve follower with Blaster in its name in your Evolve deck face down, and this follower costs 3 less to play. So of course, with Blaster Blade being a free Evolve, it's going to be nice to be flipping that card over and then playing Friendship K for free. So we can build a pretty good damn!
Yeah. T-R-I-double-N. Just to get you away. What I got to do. What I got to do. Just to get you away. What I got to do.